Good. And now, if you're just joining us on Facebook, we welcome you to our worship. Today we are in the third Sunday of Lent and beginning to look at what it means to let go of expectations, to let go of ego, even to let go of fear of death, so that we can be empty to receive the promise of Christ coming at Easter. So I'm glad that you're with us today. And I know that we come from many walks of life, and on Facebook you're kind of scattered all over the place. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter where you've been on your life's journey. No matter who you are or where you've been on your life's journey, you are welcome here.
Lord, the door cracks open to a new day and a new time. Fresh air and blue skies. Faces we've longed to see. You make all things new. It is not the same world we left, and it may never be again. But you are the God of restoration. You, O God, make a way in the wilderness, a river in the desert. Where we have turned away, Lord, we come back and pray for healing, for our land, for our people. We pray that you refresh our faith, our relationships, our communities, our purpose. We gather our courage, our hands will be strong, our voices will be loud, and we will carry the good news of your beautiful hope. As we step out, you are with us. Our work has just begun.
So today I have what is to me a significant birthday. I'm turning, yay, thank you. I'm turning 75 today, which I used to think was old age. And it is. I mean, let's face it, it is. But the thing I'm surprised about is at 75, when I look out into the world, it looks just the same as it looked when I was 15 or 20 or whatever. But, our bodies, in fact, are aging. So I've got that where I'm having to face, the kind of mortality, being an old man now. Plus, I'm retiring in a few months, and we're selling our home, which is a place that I had just expected to stay in until the end of my life. And we're moving to a state that in a million years I never thought I would live in. And we're building a community that I haven't even seen yet and probably won't see for several months. So I'm feeling some anxiety and a little uncertainty. And that can, whenever we feel that, if you feel that just like I feel that, that can lead us to kind of negative feelings. That can lead us to a negative place. So I was looking for some, story or anecdote or something like that that could help me get a perspective on a change and loss and all of those things that we all go through. And as I was doing that, I came across a story that actually I shared in a sermon with you 7 years ago, but it's such a powerful story and it spoke to me so much, I'm going to share it with you again today. But first I want to step back and look at something from the history of Jerusalem and the Israeli people, which speaks to this also. So if you were living in Jerusalem in around the time 500 BC, then you undoubtedly would have heard your parents tell about their early life as second or third generation exiles in Babylon. Their parents and their grandparents would have been torn from their homes and their livelihood and everything and herded off across the desert by Nebuchadnezzar's army to a strange land and an uncertain future. And once they resettled in Babylon, they were outcasts in that society, and they longed to be able to go home again. Many became sick. Some even died in despair. And in your sermon notes, you'll see from Psalm 137 how they wrote about that. They said, "By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. How can we sing songs to the Lord while we're in a foreign land?" For decades, the exiles resigned themselves to being abandoned by God. How could God have let this happen to them? Then, a seemingly miracle happened when there was a turn of events and a new king, King Cyrus, suddenly freed them to return to the homeland, to return to Jerusalem. Maybe God had not forgotten them after all. But as soon as they got the first glimpse of this much anticipated visit to Jerusalem, once they got the first glimpse of Jerusalem, their hearts must have sank because there was just a pile of rubble. And at that point, many of them totally lost hope. Now, I'm sure that many of the parents would have told and retold their children about the back-breaking work they did to rebuild the wall and to begin rebuilding the temple, to rebuild their crumbled lives back in Jerusalem, all the while being under attack from neighboring warlords. Now that they had passed, their children had inherited the responsibility to rebuild this partially rebuilt temple. And so, gathered there in worship in a temple that was not completely rebuilt, still had broken rocks and bricks around it, they would respond in unison to the priest who was reading from Psalm 107. And that was the responsive prayer we had today. The priest would recite of the chaos and the hardships that the ancestors had endured. And after recounting these troubles, everyone would join together in affirming how God had stepped in by saying His love endures forever. When we face hardships and uncertainty, we may think that God is not there with us. Maybe we think that we're even being punished for something, but we remember God's love endures forever. Or maybe we can remember a prayer from Isaiah 64, verses 8 and 9. He said, "Still, God, you are our Father. We're the clay and you are the potter. All of us are what you make us." And, we talk a lot in our church about how we are co-creators of our life, us and God co-creating our life. He continues, don't be angry with us, O God. Don't keep a permanent accounting of our wrongdoing. Keep in mind, please, that we are your people, all of us. Maybe you keep your own little checklist of all your wrongdoings. I do. God does not. Never, no matter where we find ourselves or even how much we have screwed up, God will meet us right there in that place and will mold us. Now, when we're in the midst of it all, we may not see God's hand at work. Sometimes we have to look back to see and appreciate what God had been doing with us. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard explained, life must be understood backwards, but lived forward. Martha Conant traveled a great deal on her job. It was just a typical July morning for her in Denver when she boarded a plane to Chicago. It was a DC-10, and pretty soon they were cruising at 37,000 feet, and the flight crew had just completed serving lunch. This was 1989, when they still served food on the planes. But just after lunch, there was a sudden jerk, and adrenaline just kind of jolted through everybody on board. But they were quickly reassured by the pilot, who came on in a calm voice and said, "We've lost an engine, but no problem." He said, "Look, DC-10s can fly properly with 2 engines. They were designed that way. Sorry for the disturbance. I hope you enjoy the rest of your lunch." The flight attendants came around and started picking up the dishes, and a member of the flight crew came from the cabin and walked back to look out the window at the wings. But as he did it, he was calm and he was talking to people as he strolled down the aisle. And so Martha concluded that this confidence was so high, so this is just a hitch and everything was going to be fine. About an hour later, the pilot came back into the intercom and said they had decided to land in Sioux City, Iowa. And he apologized that they might miss a few connecting flights, but he assured everybody that they would be transported to O'Hare as quickly as possible. Now, he said it was likely to be a rough landing, and so just to be safe, he gave instructions about how they would brace themselves. He said, "When I call out the word brace, what I'd like you to do is put your heads down between your knees and just tightly hold on to the seat in front of you." What the pilot had failed to mention was that the DC-10's rear engine had torn itself to shreds. And as it burst off, it ripped open the hydraulic system that steers the plane. And thus, it left the pilots with none of the kind of controls that they normally had for flying or for landing. Now, the crew had devised a way of steering by powering one wing more than the other, but they could only turn right. Soon afterwards, the pilot's voice appeared again, this time barking, "Brace, brace, brace." Martha says the next thing that she remembered was a huge influx of air and gravel and debris gushing by her. She said her body was bounced around, her arms flailed, she was totally out of control. And between moments of consciousness, she said to herself, "But I'm still alive, I'm still alive." And then the motion suddenly stopped, and there was absolute silence. Martha had just survived the crash of United Airlines Flight 232 that carried 296 passengers and crew, almost all of whom were killed or injured. The fortunate survivors were cared for by volunteer doctors and priests and social workers. She remembers one young social worker saying to her, quote, "God must have a reason for saving you. You haven't finished your life's work yet." But that comment really bothered her. She thought about it for a long time. You see, even after she'd invested a lot of time in trying to figure out what she was supposed to be doing, the flip side of this young man's counsel was that God must have been through with all those other people, that they didn't have a purpose for living. And she couldn't believe that. She realized actually a lot of factors were involved in this crash and her survival. It wasn't about God. The NTSB investigation revealed that there were small fatigue cracks in the fan disc blade assembly on the damaged rear engine. And when they were looking into this, they encountered a very confusing and contradictory paper trail of its origins. But likely what caused it was that General Electric despite having failed an independent company's ultrasound test of this for its purity, decided to put profit above the risks of the lives of the passengers. On the positive side, there was enormous competence shown by the crew, who also showed great courage, including a DC-10 trainer who just happened to be a passenger that day, and showed the pilots how to do things to steer the plane beyond what the DC-10 engineers had actually thought was possible. So let's face it, we live in a world that has a fair amount of randomness and sin and evil in it. Stuff happens. Sometimes someone seated at the front of the plane where few survived was a random seat assignment, whereas people in the rear of the plane had a much better chance of surviving. A gamma ray comes from the sun and hits the wrong part of a strand of DNA, and a person has cancer. Evil takes charge of a situation, and lives are destroyed. God did not place us into a world that works like clockworks, where every tick is perfectly controlled by God. Bad stuff happens to good people every moment of every day. Some of it caused by human sin, some of it by forces of evil, some of it by human error, and some of it by random chance. Because someone dies doesn't mean that God no longer has a purpose for them. As long as we live, we do have a purpose. So wherever we are in life, regardless of our age or our circumstances, God will be with us to help us to live out that purpose. But the choice is left to us as to how we will respond. As the psalm we read together declares, God's love endures forever, meaning that God will find a way to bring some goodness or some blessing out of everything that comes our way, every hardship and every tragedy. God can use what God did not choose, and we face the same choice. Will we use it also? What will we make of whatever comes our way? In the case of Martha Conan, her survival led to her reprioritizing her life. She later would say, and it's in your sermon notes, one of the things that has accompanied me, followed me, and surrounded me, wrapped me in the feeling, that feeling of gratitude for whatever happens. That event was like being picked up by the scruff of the neck and shaken. And then, tearfully, she continues, and God says, this is your only life. Be grateful for it. Just be grateful that you have these days and these hours and these wonderful people in your life. Just be grateful for that. The psychiatrist Erwin Yalom warns, life shrinks when death is denied. We live in a society that doesn't want to talk about death. We just want to party on, party on, party on. But when we do that, our life actually begins to shrink. We are here for a finite time. Now, you can try to run from death. You can distract yourself with screens and magazines, cutting yourself off from the real cycle of life. But part of what Lent is to call us back to the reality of our mortality, so that we can make the days and the hours we have really count. Whatever your age, whatever your circumstances, whatever struggles you're going through, and we all do, we can make them count. One time at Costco, the man in front of me with this giant shopping cart, you know how it is at Costco, he had a large screen TV, he had a box of apples and a big bottle of vodka in his cart, and he was pushing it right up to the checker, and suddenly he stopped, he froze, and he said out loud, "Whoa!" He wasn't upset, but I looked up to see what he was looking at, and right there in the middle of Costco was a coffin on display, a coffin for sale in Costco. Now, in that moment, the haze of his life had just been punctured. Everything we have is fleeting. You are fleeting. I am fleeting. But in a moment, reality can break in, and we can either hide and deny our mortality, we can numb ourselves with Netflix or drugs, or we can embrace the gift of life in this moment, all that it is and all that it is not. And as we do that, suddenly existence, life becomes remarkable. Becomes remarkable. Philosopher Heidegger said that in that state one marvels not about the way things are, but that they are. Just that they are is a marvel. You're going to die. I'm going to die. The clock for all of us is just ticking. What we do with each of those ticks is the choice we make. At the time of the city's conquest, many of its citizens were forced into Babylonian exile, and many suffered. But there were others who just got on with life in Babylon, and they actually prospered there, even as they yearned for the homeland. They yearned for the homeland, but they prospered. And after 70 years, a fortunate few got to return to Jerusalem, and maybe they thought that, happy days, now their troubles were over. But then when they came face to face with the crumbled walls of the holy city, their hearts sank. And some became bitter, some became resentful, but others just became leaders of rebuilding the city. Both groups asked the same question. They asked, "Where is God?" But they came up with different answers. Steve Jobs had a way of finding courage and creativity in life when it makes no sense. And this is what he said. It's also in your sermon notes. He says, "You cannot connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. Because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart even when it leads you off the well-worn path. And that will make all the difference." Martha decided to live differently. She decided to live with few regrets. Seemingly small choices would make a big difference in her life. Not leaving home while being angry with anybody. Not passing up an opportunity to tell her husband and one of her boys how much she loved them. It was not an easy thing for her to do. It was not her habit. It's not the way she was wired. She sometimes thought it was hard. But then she thought, oh, this is hard, but, well, I might not be coming home tonight. So it's really not that hard after all. Every couple of years, since the time I've been here, I've shared with you a poem that is in the back of your sermon notes. And I share it every couple of years because I think it's just so important that we can't be reminded of it enough. So I share it with you today. And I hope that you'll take this and post it on your refrigerator or on the mirror or someplace so that you'll see it often. Normal day. Let me be aware of the treasure that you are. Let me learn from you, love you, savor you, and bless you before you depart. Let me not pass you by in quest of some rare, perfect tomorrow. Let me hold you while I may, for it will not always be so. One day I'm going to dig my fingers into the earth, or bury my face in the pillow, or stretch myself taut, or stretch my arms to the sky and want nothing more than your return. Normal day.